You had 206 countries, 206 National Olympic Committees, 35 or 40 Olympic sports, all with different rules or no rules in anti-doping, and saying, what we have to do is collect all of these rules and make them the same for every athlete, every country, every sport.
WADA is the World Anti-Doping Agency. We are here to fight for clean sport. We're here to fight for the rights of clean athletes, and we're here to protect the values of sports in the whole world.
The organization that has established itself over the past 20 years almost as the place to go for matters involving anti-doping. It wasn't like that all the time.
The early days? Yeah, well, WADA only in existence for about 20 years, almost 20 years. Started as a small idea, a small concept, also a small problem, because it was problems that created the need for an agency such as WADA.
Big problem that affected the integrity of sport, the economics of sport, the reason that you want your kids to participate in sport.
And we worked quite hard to keep focus on what we were going to do with the doping problems that clearly existed.
It was one thing to say that we don't like this. It was another thing to say, how do we stop it?
It really was the impact of the so-called Festina scandal in the Tour de France in 1998, and the realization of what was going on caused everyone to say, you really can't trust cycling or any other sport to really police its athletes. You can't rely on governments of particular countries to make sure their athletes are clean. What we need is an independent international agency that is not controlled by any particular stakeholder.
1999 in February in Lausanne, the World Conference on Doping in Sport, organized by the IOC.
Many discussions took place about the role of a possible new agency and the system of decision, the governance, the financial contributions.
And this all led up to the point November 99 when WADA was founded.
Public authorities and the sports side has a conversation, and they have decided to make a hybrid organization.
And WADA came as a proposal to joint effort between sports and governments.
Around the table for decision making in WADA, you have the representatives of the government, but on the other side also the representative of the sport movement on an equal basis.
It was the first time that an agency was actually made up of 50% sport and 50% public authorities or governments. So for us that was a significant challenge to get the public authorities to trust sport in handling doping matters, and for the sports movement to allow the governments of the world into their realm.
Dick Pound was, in my view, the perfect man at the perfect time. Having Dick Pound at the beginning of WADA's existence really allowed the agency to be put on the map.
Richard Pound, I think, was a real pioneer. I mean, he had to dig the trenches and to move things forward.
As a president, he extolled all the virtues of WADA, particularly transparency and independence.
And he managed to, get rule harmonized across all sports and all governments. I don't think people realize the achievement of that. It was really a very important groundwork that had to be done.
Anyway, it took me 9 years to get out of it instead of 2, and I'm still on the foundation board.
And so slowly we were 10, we were 12, and also started the process of selecting the permanent headquarters of WADA.
I was on the reporting side at the time of WADA deciding to move to Montreal, and certainly there were a number of elements that made a difference. But from my standpoint, the main difference was made by the Secretary of State for Sport at the time, the former Montreal Mayor, Denis Coderre.
20 years ago, before WADA, I was the Sports Minister of Canada that brought the World Anti-Doping here. And at that time, you had 36 members on the board of WADA, and it was split equally, 18 government, 18 Federation, IOC and all that. And just a few weeks later, we had a major anti-doping conference in Sydney, Australia. We were very, very focused on ethics in sport. And I said to my people, I said, WADA will come to Montreal.
I think Montreal is a fantastic city to be in. When I joined WADA in September 2002, we were around 15, 20 people from all over the world already, but it was really almost the era of the pioneers. But it was absolutely fascinating to start putting in place the basis of a new agency with such an ambitious objective, which is to protect clean sport.
What we had to do at the outset was make sure that WADA had credibility, and therefore we had to work at a fairly fast pace to institute things like the first World Anti-Doping Code.
Let me take you back to 2000 when this all started. Each international federation had their own anti-doping rules. Each National Olympic Committee had their own anti-doping rules, and governments had their own anti-doping rules. And so one of the first things that WADA decided they had to do was to get everybody on the same page with a common set of rules. So that's where the code comes in. It's a common set of rules.
The code is a way to keep our sport clean, keep everyone at the same rules, have the rules written down so that no one is confused.
Start from definition of the anti-doping, the sanction, and how organized in each country the anti-doping program.
So that every sport and every country would deal with the problem in the same way. And that happens in 2003 with the first World Anti-Doping Code.
First came to me and said, would you be involved in the writing of the code? I've written a lot of sets of anti-doping rules, and I thought it would take me about 2-3 weeks. I'm a lawyer, people pay me. I try to be efficient in what I do. It took a couple years.
It was an impressive way then of building up anti-doping policies.
It took all the good ideas from many people around the world, all the good experience that many of these people have, and brought it into one document.
We promised that this would be a living document, and that it would be a document that was owned by the stakeholders, not just by WADA. So at that first World Conference, I could say with a straight face, this isn't my code, it isn't WADA's code, it's your code, and everybody in that room of 5,000 people has made some contribution that they can see in the document.
It's an absolute miracle to have had one single document harmonizing the rules and policies in sports at the time.
John Fahey came after Richard. He too was an outstanding man, had very strong values.
He was a minister from Australia.
I was a representative of the governments of the world. WADA is a partnership between sport and 196 governments of the world. I was the nominee of those governments for the term that I occupied.
He was a statesman, he was a politician.
John Fahey managed to do a lot of consolidation, make sure that the organization was still striving in the right direction.
It's in John's era that WADA developed a lot of partnership, in particular partnerships with the pharmaceutical industry, partnerships with Interpol and law enforcement, and everything that has to do with intelligence collection, intelligence gathering, and investigations.
Then came the last and current president, Craig Reedy.
Craig knew us very well because he has been, since the inception of WADA, an executive committee and foundation board member. He was our treasurer, he was the chair of our finance committee. And Craig came with a sensitivity from the sports movement, but a good knowledge also of the governments.
As president of WADA, you have an overarching role. I chair the board, I chair the executive committee. I'm involved in most of the routine things that go on. It's interesting, and I lead a very considerable team of high quality people. The biggest challenge that has arisen for WADA, and I suppose for me as its president, was the news that broke on, I think it was the 14th of December 2014, by a German television station, that there had been rampant breaches of the regulations and cheating in the sport of track and field athletics in Russia. And that, I'm afraid, has been expanded to include not just track and field athletics, but effectively the accusation was the whole of Russian sport. It involved Olympic teams, it involved major events, and that has been such a threat to the integrity of sport.
That's been really, I think, WADA's defining moment, I think, of the past 20 years. It has involved WADA from the get-go, from their suspension of the Russia anti-doping agency, to other steps they took over the past few years to corral Russia, to make sure that this couldn't happen again in Russia. It has consumed WADA for the past 3 years like no other scandal, no other case involving anti-doping.
Credit needs to be given to Craig for steering WADA during a time where things were really challenging and difficult.
And he had to find a solution to move things forward, to keep the organization on track despite a lot of attack on the organization, to ensure that justice would be done, both for the athletes, but also to ensure that the process by which we were dealing with Russia would be followed and work, allowing for a fair resolution of the entire crisis.
It's a long-term process, and we spent years rebuilding the Russian anti-doping agency until it has now become a highly efficient and well-organized group of people. Simple view, and certainly my view, was that the best thing we could do to speak to athletes who were concerned was to say to them, we have actually done something about this, and we have tried to stop the problem, but we've certainly made a major impact, and I think the situation is better now, certainly than it was 5 or 6 years ago.
Having somebody like Craig at the helm of WADA, I think Craig is a very astute politician and strategist. I think that he managed to bring WADA through that crisis very brilliantly without necessarily being given the credit, but I think that history will prove him right, and I think that what we're seeing at the moment will bring WADA to what it should be, which is really a strong watchdog of the global fight against doping in sport.
Instead of relying on testing an individual as the only deterrent, we now investigate. And when I started many years ago, we had 1 investigator, and we now have 11. We have probably the best investigations department in world sport.
Initially, it was all about samples. It was all about what the laboratory could detect. It's become far more sophisticated since that time.
The challenge for us is we are not law enforcement, so we don't have all the power that a law enforcement has. First. Second, we're an international organization, so we always have to go into a country to do an investigation. So actually what we have is interviews, open source, and our mindset. And this is why I have gathered experienced police or former law enforcement people who know how to investigate cases. So in this respect, one of the key elements for our work are whistleblowers and informants. So the first thing that we established was actually a platform where people outside who wanted to report misconduct in doping, that they have a place where they can report that.
With the improvement in our techniques, with the improvement in our documents, the code and the international standards, with investigations becoming an integral part of the fight, we are now better equipped.
At the beginning of 2020, we will have at the top positions of WADA, the vice presidency and the presidency, 2 recent former athletes, Witold Bańka, who currently is the sports minister in Poland, and Yang, who's a former short track speed skater from China. And so having these 2 persons at the helm of an agency which really fights for the rights of the athletes and the protection of athletes' dreams is fantastic.
My name is Witold Bańka, the Minister of Sport and Tourism from Poland and the next WADA president. Eradicate doping, eradicate the cheats from from sports environment. This is our common mission. That's why I proposed establishing Anti-Doping Solidarity Fund. Well-developed countries should help these less developed countries lead anti-doping policy conduct and improve the system. The second very important issue is that, for my opinion, we should increase the numbers of accredited laboratories worldwide. We have only 30 accredited laboratories and only one in Africa. Better education projects, hear the voice of athletes. I'm the former athlete, that's why I fully understand this, the necessity that we need to hear the voice of athletes.
Athletes on one side are more and more interested to play a very active role, but in addition to that, on the governmental side, we see that more and more either representatives from police or from the judiciary or from other areas of government are being fighting against doping on a daily basis.
We need to be supportive of what WADA is trying to achieve and to be part of the fight against doping.
One of the things that you feel here is also that people are here because they believe in what they do.
Because I do believe that all my colleagues and all of them who work for WADA were there for the good cause. They understood that athletes needs to be treated fairly.
We are the World Anti-Doping Agency, and it's really important that the W is at the front of our thinking.
It's firstly evolved into an international organisation. Conceptually, it's perfect. It's independent, it's international, it's for every sport, it's for all genders, all nations. In that regard, you say, how does this now work in practice? It's come a long way, it's still got a long way to go.
I cannot imagine sports without WADA, and I cannot imagine the society without sport. So some way there's a relationship in between the society, the people needing WADA.
The process has been enormous, incredible. We should congratulate WADA for that, particularly in the way in which a number of common standards have been defined, because these common standards, whether they deal with governance or whether they deal with the implementation of the World Code, whether they deal with management or education, these common standards, they really create a new situation. It's like reshaping at a global level the whole anti-doping way of functioning, and I think this is very important.
We have to be better on a worldwide basis. Our new compliance standards and systems help in that. And secondly, we need to spend more money on education, because at the end of the day, the only way we will win this particular battle is to persuade lots and lots of young people who come into sport that this is something that they should not do. Cheating like this is not acceptable, and if we get that information across to generations of young people, then I think we will have solved a lot of the problems.